Lieutenant Kim Hana pressed her face against the small porthole as the transport shuttle approached Nexus Prime. The trading station looked like a floating city made of metal and glass, spinning slowly against the backdrop of distant stars. Ships from dozens of different worlds docked at its massive ports, their strange designs making Earth's vessels look like toys in comparison. This was it, her new home for the next 2 years. The shuttle's pilot, a green-skinned Vorthak with too many eyes, glanced back at her. First time seeing the station, human? Yes, Hana replied, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. She'd trained for this moment for 3 years, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer size of Nexus Prime. The station housed over 200,000 beings from across the galaxy, all living and working together in what was supposed to be perfect harmony. You picked an interesting time to join security, the pilot continued. Lot of tension lately. The big powers are getting restless. Before Hana could ask what he meant, the shuttle shuddered as it connected to the docking bay. The airlock hissed open and she stepped into her new world. The first thing that hit her was the smell. Not bad, just different. A mixture of exotic spices, alien foods, and the metallic tang of recycled air. The second thing was the noise. Hundreds of voices speaking in languages she'd never heard, mixed with the hum of machinery and the distant rumble of ships coming and going. But what really struck her was how she stood out. Every being she passed turned to stare. Some looked curious, others suspicious, and a few seemed almost hostile. She was probably the only human most of them had ever seen in person. You must be the human. Hana turned to see her new partner approaching. Grixtel was everything the briefings had described and more. Nearly 8 feet tall with crystalline skin that reflected the station's lights like a walking prism. His forearms moved independently as he walked, and his voice sounded like rocks, grinding together. Lieutenant Kim Hana reporting for duty, she said, extending her hand in the traditional human greeting. Grixtal looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment, then turned and walked away. Follow me. Try to keep up. The security office was located in the station's central hub, a massive chamber that stretched up for what seemed like miles. Walkways and platforms connected different levels, with beings of all shapes and sizes going about their business. Hana had to crane her neck to see the top. Impressive, isn't it? Grixtal said without slowing down. Nexus Prime has been the galaxy's most important trading post for over 3 centuries. Every major deal, every peace treaty, every important decision passes through here eventually. They entered the security department through doors that were clearly designed for beings, much larger than humans. Hana had to jog to keep up with Grixtal's long strides as he led her through corridors lined with alien technology she couldn't even begin to understand. The briefing room held about 20 officers from different species. Conversations stopped as they entered, and Hana felt those familiar stares again. A few officers made what sounded like comments in their own languages, and she didn't need a translator to know they weren't compliments. At the front of the room stood Commander Velthara, an elegant Ashanti with silver fur and intelligent golden eyes. She was smaller than Grixtal but somehow commanded more presence. When she spoke, everyone listened. Officers, meet Lieutenant Kim Hana, our new human representative. The way she said representative made it clear this wasn't a promotion. The Human Trade Council insisted on having one of their people in our security force. Politics, you understand? A few officers chuckled. Hana felt her cheeks burn but kept her expression neutral. She'd expected this kind of reception, but it still stung. Your duties will be routine patrols and incident reports, Commander Velthara continued, barely glancing at Hana. Nothing too complex. We wouldn't want to overwhelm you with actual security work. With respect, Commander, Hana said, finding her voice. I've served in Earth's colonial security for 8 years. I've handled everything from pirate raids to full-scale planetary evacuations. The room went quiet. Commander Velthara's golden eyes fixed on Hana with something that might have been amusement. How charming. Earth's problems are quite different, from maintaining order among 200,000 beings from 47 different species, each with their own laws, customs, and ways of starting fights. More chuckles from the other officers. Grixtel's crystalline features remained unreadable, but Hana could sense his disapproval. "You'll be paired with Officer Grixtel for training," the commander continued. "Try not to slow him down too much." The briefing continued with discussions of patrol schedules, incident reports, and diplomatic protocols that seemed designed to keep Hana as far from any real responsibility as possible. She listened carefully, taking mental notes of everything she heard. After the meeting, as the other officers filed out, many giving her curious or dismissive looks, Grixtal approached her station. "Some advice, human," he said, his voice low. "This isn't your frontier colonies. Things work differently here. Follow orders, stay out of trouble, and maybe you'll make it through your assignment without embarrassing your species." Hana nodded, but inside she was already planning. She'd prove herself worthy of being here no matter what it took. What she didn't know was that her chance would come much sooner than expected, and in ways that would test everything she thought she knew about courage, loyalty, and what it truly meant to serve and protect. 3 weeks had passed since Hana's arrival at Nexus Prime, and she was finally beginning to understand the complex rhythm of life aboard the massive station. Every day brought new challenges as she learned to navigate between different species, each with their own customs and ways of doing things. Some were friendly enough, like the small furry Kelvani who ran most of the food stalls. Others, like the towering hegemony traders with their military bearing, barely acknowledged her existence. But it was the small things that started bothering her first. During her morning patrol through Sector 7, the lights flickered for exactly 30 seconds before returning to normal. The Ashanti maintenance supervisor she reported it to simply shrugged his silver-furred shoulders. "Old station, Lieutenant. These things happen." The next day, it was the communication array in the diplomatic quarter. For 17 minutes, all external communications went dead. No ships could contact the station, no outgoing messages could be sent. Then, just as suddenly as it had failed, everything worked perfectly again. "Routine maintenance cycle," Grixtal explained when Hana brought it up. "The system automatically reboots itself, nothing to worry about." But Hana had worked with communication systems for years. Automatic reboots didn't last exactly 17 minutes. They were either quick or they failed completely. By the end of her first month, she had documented 12 separate incidents. Power fluctuations that lasted precisely measured amounts of time. Communication blackouts that happened right before important meetings. Cargo containers that simply vanished from high-security storage bays, with all the tracking data mysteriously corrupted. "You're seeing patterns where none exist," Commander Velthara said when Hana finally requested a meeting. The Ashanti commander barely looked up from her desk as she spoke. "Humans have a reputation for paranoia. Perhaps it's a survival trait from your violent little planet." Hana bit back her response. Earth might have been violent, but that violence had taught humans to recognize danger when they saw it. And every instinct she had was screaming that something was wrong. The arrival of the 3-power delegation made everything worse. Nexus Prime had been buzzing with preparations for weeks. Representatives from the galaxy's 3 major powers were coming to negotiate new trade agreements that could reshape commerce throughout known space. The militant hegemony wanted expanded shipping rights through neutral territories. The corporate Federation pushed for reduced tariffs on manufactured goods. The religious covenant demanded protection for their pilgrimage routes. These weren't just business meetings. The wrong decision could lead to trade wars, economic collapse, or worse. As the delegations arrived, security protocols shifted dramatically. Entire sections of the station were sealed off. Additional guards were posted at every checkpoint. Even routine patrols like Hana's were rerouted away from sensitive areas. That's when she started noticing the encrypted communications. It happened during her 3rd week of covering the lower maintenance levels, an assignment that everyone understood was basically punishment duty. The waste processing centers and environmental systems weren't glamorous, but they were essential to keeping the station running. And they were also places where someone could move around without attracting attention. Hana was checking atmospheric processors in sub-level 12 when her portable scanner picked up an unusual signal. Short bursts of data, heavily encrypted, bouncing between different communication nodes throughout the station. The timing was too regular to be random, and the encryption was military grade, far beyond what civilian traders would need. She spent 3 days tracking the signals, using her off-duty time to map their patterns. Every burst corresponded to one of the incidents she'd been documenting. Power fluctuation, communication burst. Cargo disappearance, communication burst. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. When she brought her findings to Grixtal, her partner's reaction was strange. His crystalline features, normally unreadable, seemed to shift subtly. For just a moment, she saw something that might have been surprise or worry or even fear. "This is beyond your clearance level, Lieutenant," he said, taking her datapad and scrolling through her notes. "Where did you get authorization to access these communication logs?" "I didn't need authorization. These are routine maintenance scans that anyone can access. Nevertheless, you should focus on your assigned duties." He handed the pad back to her, but not before she noticed him quickly copying something to his own device. "Leave the real investigation work to experienced officers who understand the complexities of station operations." That night, Hana found new orders waiting for her. She was being reassigned to monitoring duty in the deepest parts of the station, as far from the diplomatic quarters as physically possible. Her patrol route now included the waste processing centers, water reclamation facilities, and atmospheric recycling plants. Important work, but also work that would keep her completely isolated from anything interesting. The message was clear: stay out of the way. But as Hana made her way to her new assignment, passing through the lower levels where few others ever went, she noticed something else. These forgotten sections of the station had their own communication networks, older and less monitored than the main systems. And if someone wanted to coordinate something without being detected, these would be perfect places to do it. She thought about Grixtal's reaction to her data, about the too convenient timing of her reassignment, about the growing tension she could feel throughout the station as the trade negotiations began in earnest. Maybe Commander Velthara was right about human paranoia, but maybe sometimes paranoia was just another word for survival instinct. And Hana's instincts were telling her that Nexus Prime was about to become a very dangerous place. She decided to start her own investigation. Working alone in the deepest parts of Nexus Prime, Hana had plenty of time to think. The waste processing levels weren't glamorous, but they gave her access to parts of the station most people never saw. More importantly, they connected to maintenance tunnels that ran throughout the entire structure like blood vessels in a body. It was in these forgotten corridors that she began to piece together the truth. The encrypted communications she detected weren't random. They followed specific patterns, always originating from security checkpoints and always timed to match the mysterious incidents plaguing the station. Using the older communication networks in the lower levels, she was able to trace the signals without being detected. What she found made her blood run cold. Grixtal's personal communication device was one of the primary sources. Her own partner, the officer assigned to train her, was coordinating with someone using hegemony military encryption codes. The same codes she'd learned to recognize during her training on Earth's frontier colonies, where hegemony raiders were a constant threat. But it got worse. Cross-referencing the communication logs with duty rosters, she discovered that at least 6 other security officers were involved. All of them were assigned to critical positions throughout the station. All of them had access to the systems that had been mysteriously failing. The plan began to take shape as she decrypted more messages. It was brilliant in its simplicity and terrifying in its scope. The hegemony couldn't simply attack Nexus Prime outright without starting a galactic war. But if the station suffered a terrorist attack during the peace negotiations, if Federation extremists were blamed for killing innocent civilians and disrupting vital trade talks, then the hegemony could step in as protectors. They would occupy the station to prevent further attacks. They would control the trade routes. And they would have a legitimate excuse for their actions that the other powers couldn't challenge, without looking like they supported terrorism. The false flag operation was scheduled to begin during the next day's main negotiation session, when all 3 delegations would be gathered in the central conference chamber. Maximum casualties, maximum political impact. Hana knew she had to warn Commander Velthara immediately. Despite their rocky relationship, the Ashanti commander was dedicated to protecting the station. She would listen to evidence, especially evidence this strong. But when Hana reached the security office late that night, something felt wrong. The corridors were too quiet. The usual hum of activity that filled the station around the clock had faded to an eerie silence. Emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and the air recycling system seemed to be working harder than usual. Commander Velthara's office was dark, except for the glow of her desk terminal. The door was unlocked, which was unusual, for someone as security conscious as the commander. Hana knocked softly and entered when there was no response. Velthara sat behind her desk, apparently reading reports. But something was off about her posture, too rigid, too still, and there was a smell in the air that Hana couldn't identify. Something metallic and sharp. "Commander?" Hana called softly. The figure behind the desk looked up, and Hana's heart nearly stopped. It was Commander Velthara's face, her golden eyes, her silver fur. But the scent was wrong. Ashanti had a distinctive smell, warm and earthy like fresh soil after rain. This creature smelled like heated metal and ozone. "Ah, Lieutenant Kim," the thing wearing Velthara's appearance said, rising slowly from the chair. "I was wondering when you would piece everything together." Hana's hand moved instinctively toward her sidearm, but she forced herself to remain calm. Shapeshifters were rare, but she'd heard stories from other frontier worlds. They could perfectly mimic appearance, but not scent, not the subtle biological markers that most species took for granted. "Where is Commander Velthara?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Safe for now," the shapeshifter replied. "Though her usefulness is nearly at an end, just like yours." As it spoke, Hana noticed movement in the shadows behind the desk. Two figures emerged, both wearing the dark uniforms of Hegemony Special Forces. They moved with the predatory grace of professional killers. "The human has been quite resourceful," one of them said in accented galactic standard, "more so than our intelligence suggested. Perhaps we underestimated their capabilities." "An error we won't repeat," the shapeshifter replied. "Once the station is under hegemony protection, we'll make sure no other species interferes with our operations." The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. This wasn't just about controlling Nexus Prime. It was about eliminating any species that might threaten hegemony expansion. Humans, with their unpredictable nature and stubborn refusal to follow expected patterns, were clearly seen as a problem. To be solved. "You won't get away with this," Hana said, backing slowly toward the door. "Too many people will ask questions." "Will they?" the shapeshifter asked, tilting its head in a gesture that looked almost human. "A lone human officer, assigned to waste processing duty, dies tragically in an industrial accident just hours before terrorists attack the station. Who would question such a coincidence?" The hegemony soldiers began moving toward her, but Hana was already diving toward the emergency alarm panel. If she could trigger a station-wide alert, maybe someone would investigate, maybe the real security forces would respond before it was too late. Her finger was inches from the alarm when plasma bolts seared the air around her. The wall behind, the panel exploded in a shower of sparks and molten metal. She rolled behind Velthara's desk as more shots followed, then scrambled toward the ventilation grate in the corner of the room. "Find her," the shapeshifter shouted as Hana disappeared into the maintenance tunnel. "She knows everything. If she reaches the communication center, our entire operation is compromised." But Hana was already crawling through the narrow passage, her human size finally an advantage in spaces designed for smaller maintenance robots. Behind her, she could hear the sounds of pursuit, but also something else that made her heart sink. Explosions. Distant, but growing closer. The false flag operation had begun early. Emergency alarms started blaring throughout the station as Hana emerged into a larger tunnel. She could hear Grixtal's voice over the communication system, reporting terrorist attacks in the diplomatic quarter, calling for evacuation of civilians, requesting immediate assistance from any nearby hegemony vessels. 200,000 innocent beings were about to become hostages or worse, and she was the only person who knew the truth, the only person who could stop it. But first she had to survive long enough to do something about it. The maintenance tunnels of Nexus Prime became Hana's world. As explosions echoed through the station above her and emergency alarms wailed constantly, she crawled through spaces that most beings couldn't even fit into. The passages were designed for automated repair systems and small maintenance robots, not for living creatures. But humans were adaptable in ways that other species weren't. While Grixtal and his hegemony allies had to wear bulky environmental suits to move between different atmospheric zones, Hana could hold her breath and push through sections filled with toxic gases meant for silicon-based life forms. When the Yao, artificial gravity failed in certain areas, leaving floating debris and disorienting zero-G conditions, her Earth military training kicked in. She'd spent months learning to fight in space, something most station-born species never experienced. The first thing she had to do was restore life support to the civilian sectors. Through access panels in the tunnels, she could see the horror unfolding above. Families of different species huddled together in sealed compartments as oxygen levels dropped. Children crying in languages she didn't understand while their parents tried to comfort them with words that fear made meaningless. The shapeshifter wearing Commander Velthara's face had been thorough. Life support was failing systematically, starting with the areas housing the most vulnerable populations. The elderly Kelvani in the retirement sector would be first to suffer from oxygen deprivation. Then the nurseries where dozens of different species raised their young together. But the saboteurs had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that human knowledge was limited to human systems. What they didn't know was that Hana had spent weeks studying every technical manual she could find, learning how different species approached engineering problems. She understood Ashanti environmental systems, Vorthak power distribution, even the complex atmospheric processors that kept the station habitable for 47 different forms of life. Working quickly in the cramped tunnel spaces, she began rerouting power from non-essential systems. Luxury shops didn't need full lighting when people were dying. Entertainment districts could survive without climate control. By redirecting that power to life support, she bought precious time for the trapped civilians. Her actions didn't go unnoticed. Within an hour, she could hear search teams moving through the tunnels above her. Grixtal's voice echoed through the metal corridors, coordinated with voices speaking in hegemony military language. "The human is more resourceful than we anticipated," she heard one soldier report. "She's accessing systems we didn't know could be modified." "Find her," Grixtal replied, his crystal voice carrying clearly through the metal walls. "Every minute she remains free puts our operation at risk." But finding her was easier said than done. The maintenance tunnels connected to every part of the station, and Hana was using that to her advantage. She moved constantly, never staying in one area long enough to be cornered. When pursuit got too close, she would slip into sections designed for different atmospheric conditions, places where her hunters couldn't follow without preparation. Her next target was their communication network. The saboteurs were coordinating their operation through encrypted channels, but they were using the station's own communication infrastructure to do it. If she could disrupt their ability to talk to each other, she could buy more time and maybe create confusion in their ranks. The main communication hub was heavily guarded, but Hana had learned something important during her weeks of isolation. The station's older systems, the ones built when Nexus Prime was first constructed centuries ago, were still connected to the modern networks. They were considered obsolete and largely ignored, but they still functioned. Using access points that hadn't been checked in decades, she began introducing chaos into the hegemony communication system. She rerouted their encrypted messages through feedback loops that created delays and confusion. She changed priority codes so that urgent messages were treated as routine maintenance requests. Most importantly, she began recording everything and preparing to broadcast it station-wide. But her most dangerous move was yet to come. Through the station's internal sensors, she could see hegemony warships approaching. 3 heavy cruisers, their weapons already charging, broadcasting offers of assistance in dealing with the terrorist attack. Once they docked, the occupation would be complete. The only way to stop them was to reach the central control room and expose the truth. But that meant leaving the relative safety of the maintenance tunnels and entering the most heavily guarded, area of the station. As she made her way through the upper levels, avoiding patrols and using every trick she'd learned in 8 years of frontier service, Hana began to understand something important. This wasn't just about stopping a conspiracy. It was about proving that humans deserved their place in the galactic community. Every species she'd met on Nexus Prime had their strengths. The Ashanti were graceful diplomats. The Vorthak were master engineers. The Kelvani had an intuitive understanding of trade and commerce. But humans brought something different to the table, the stubborn refusal to give up when everything seemed hopeless. Her people had earned their place in space by surviving on worlds that should have killed them, by adapting to situations that would have broken other species, by finding solutions where none seemed to exist. Now crawling through hostile territory with every security force on the station hunting her, she was about to prove that human determination was worth something. The central control room was just ahead, past a corridor filled with hegemony soldiers, and the shapeshifter who thought wearing a dead commander's face would be enough to fool everyone. It was time to show them what one stubborn human could accomplish when the stakes were high enough. The central control room of Nexus Prime was a cathedral of technology, its curved walls lined with displays showing every aspect of station operations. Massive holographic screens projected images of the approaching hegemony warships, their weapons glowing with barely contained energy. In the center of it all stood the shapeshifter wearing Commander Velthara's stolen face, directing the final phase of the operation with cold efficiency. Hana watched from the maintenance shaft above, counting the guards positioned around the room. 8 hegemony soldiers, all armed with military-grade plasma weapons. 2 of Grixtal's corrupted security officers monitoring communication channels. And in the corner, her former partner himself, his crystalline features reflecting the light from dozens of screens as he coordinated with the approaching fleet. Getting into the room would be suicide. Getting out alive would be impossible. But Hana wasn't planning to escape. She was planning to make sure the truth survived, even if she didn't. The maintenance shaft she was hiding in connected directly to the station's primary communication array. From here she could access every screen, every speaker, every communication device on Nexus Prime. But she would only get one chance. The moment she started broadcasting, every weapon in the room would be aimed at her position. She thought about the civilians trapped throughout the station, families huddled in sealed compartments, wondering if they would live to see another day. The real Commander Velthara, locked away somewhere by the shapeshifter. The diplomatic delegations, probably dead or captured by now. 200,000. Innocent beings whose only crime was believing that species could work together in peace. Taking a deep breath, Hana activated her portable scanner and began the most important broadcast of her life. Attention all residents of Nexus Prime. Her voice echoed through every corridor, every room, every section of the massive station. This is Lieutenant Kim Hana of Station Security. What you are experiencing is not a terrorist attack, it is a false flag operation conducted by hegemony infiltrators. The reaction in the control room was immediate. Weapons swung toward the ceiling as soldiers tried to locate her position. The shapeshifter's stolen face twisted with rage. "Find her! Cut the transmission!" it screamed. But Hana was already moving, crawling through the narrow shaft as plasma bolts burned through the metal around her. The being you know as Commander Velthara is an imposter. Officer Grixtal and several other security personnel are working with hegemony forces to seize control of the station. She emerged from the shaft behind the primary console, rolling as more shots seared the air where she had been. Her small human frame, once seen as a weakness, now allowed her to move through spaces and take cover behind equipment that would have been impossible for larger beings. "I'm broadcasting a full biological scan now," she continued, reaching for the controls despite the weapons trained on her. "You'll see the shapeshifter's true hegemony physiology. This has all been planned to justify military occupation." The scan results appeared on screens throughout the station, impossible to fake or deny. The readings clearly showed non-Ashanti biology, hegemony genetic markers, the distinctive cellular structure of a military infiltrator. The effect was immediate and devastating for the conspirators. Throughout Nexus Prime, beings who had been cowering in fear began to understand what was really happening. and they began to fight back. In the merchant district, Therian traders emerged from their shops with industrial cutting tools and loading equipment, forming organized groups to hunt down hegemony infiltrators. The Kelvani, despite their small size, used their intimate knowledge of the station's service passages to coordinate resistance efforts. Even species that normally couldn't stand each other put aside their differences to face a common threat. But it was in the control room that the real battle was being fought. Grixtel had finally located Hana's position behind the communication console, his forearms moving with deadly precision as he aimed his weapon. "You should have stayed in waste processing, human," he said, his crystalline voice filled with contempt. "Your species never learns when to quit." "You're right," Hana replied, diving as his plasma bolt shattered the console she'd been hiding behind. "We don't." The fighting that followed was desperate and chaotic. Hana used every trick she'd learned in frontier warfare, improvising weapons from broken equipment, using the room's own technology against her attackers. When a hegemony soldier cornered her behind a bank of servers, she overloaded a power coupling and used the explosion to blind him temporarily. When another tried to flank her position, she redirected coolant from the environmental systems to create a slippery barrier. But it was numbers that finally made the difference. Not the numbers fighting against her, but the numbers fighting for her. As her broadcast continued to repeat throughout the station, more and more beings joined the resistance. Security officers who had remained loyal began coordinating with civilian groups. The diplomatic delegations, freed by their own bodyguards, added their voices to hers. The shapeshifter realized the operation was collapsing. "All units fall back. To the docking bays," it ordered. "Prepare for evacuation." But there would be no evacuation. The approaching hegemony warships, faced with Federation and Covenant vessels that had responded to the emergency broadcasts, found themselves outnumbered and outgunned. Rather than start a three-way war they couldn't win, they retreated into hyperspace. In the aftermath, as station security rounded up the remaining infiltrators, Hana found herself sitting in the same briefing room where she'd been dismissed as a political appointment just months before. But everything was different now. The officers who had once looked at her with suspicion or contempt now watched her with something approaching awe. Commander Velthara, rescued from her hidden prison, stood at the front of the room. Her silver fur was matted and her dignity bruised, but her golden eyes held warmth that hadn't been there before. "Lieutenant Kim," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "On behalf of Nexus Prime and all its inhabitants, I thank you. Your actions saved not just lives, but the very idea that different species can work together in peace." She paused, studying Hana with new respect. "I also owe you an apology. We judged your species by our own limitations, not by your capabilities. That was our mistake, and nearly our downfall." The commander's next words would echo through diplomatic channels across the galaxy. "It seems that what we considered human stubbornness is actually human courage. What we thought was paranoia was actually wisdom, and what we dismissed as primitive thinking was actually the kind of adaptability that saves civilizations." The trade negotiations resumed the next day, but with a new understanding. Humanity's status in the galactic community had changed forever, not through military conquest or technological superiority, but through one officer's refusal to give up when everything seemed lost. Nexus Prime became a symbol of interspecies cooperation, with the human approach to problem-solving now recognized as essential to maintaining peace. And in the station's archives, Hana's stand was recorded not just as a security incident, but as the day the galaxy learned what humans were truly capable of when they stood alone against impossible odds. Sometimes, being too stubborn to quit was exactly what the universe needed.